Okay, now we are ready to move on and start bringing the mat together. We've got all of our pieces ready, and now we need to do some ironing on. So grab your road pieces and remove the heat and bond backing from it. There. So now we need to center it on the ivory felt. So you're going to have a little bit of extra at the top and the bottom that we trim off near the end, but just try and get it as straight and square as possible. If there's any little pieces, clean them up. Now's the best time to do that. So now I'm going to do all of the iron-on pieces all at once. So here, this is a blank iron-on t-shirt transfer disc. It is just, hopefully it is, it's kind of hard to tell if it's not printed on. It'll end up being clear, but I tuck it underneath here, so when the overpass is stuffing in, it goes against that. It reduces some of the friction. It just makes the mat work a little bit better. And then you're also going to add in this rectangular black piece, and because you want the heat and bond to stick to that. A little bigger than what I need it to be. I could trim it afterwards, but I'm just going to do it right now. Adding this extra support here just makes the mat a little bit more durable and easy for the kids to put it together. There. So now we need all of the little decorative pieces too. So all of the flowers, trees, the pond goes there. Either one. I put trees here, some more trees up here, and wherever you want. These are just to add extra little bits of color to make it more appealing. Oh, I'm not going to put that one on. And then the flowers down here. So one bigger one. You can choose whatever colors you want. I like the orange, the purple, and the yellow. It just really pops. So these are the only places that we need to do iron-on transfers for right now. Oh, sorry. One last thing. So you're going to take your overpass piece, and it has to get ironed on to here too. So you want to make sure that that gets put in place as well. And it should go back about as far as what you cut off underneath there. So there's my cut line, and it goes there. So, and you want to make sure that it's lined up with the insert tab pocket down there. You also want to make sure that down here, this doesn't extend too far, because this is going to get trimmed and you don't want the overpass hanging outside of the mat. Okay, so now all of the pieces are in place, I believe, and I'm going to iron them all. So lay out your ironing sheet. This takes a bit of time because you want to make sure that you get a good bond on it. I also do it on a flat surface. I don't like to do this on an ironing board because you don't get a really good adhesion to it. This is just a laminate tabletop. It's not actually really wood, even though it looks like it. So you can easily burn this felt if you leave it for too long. If you don't leave it long enough, all the little pieces are going to pop off. So there's a bit of an art to it. You can keep checking, so holding back the paper. Oh, that was good on that one. Sometimes where there's the little colorful pieces, give it an extra hit. You can also, once you get everything kind of initially stuck, flip the mat over and iron from the back side too. So I'm going to get that ironed in place, and then I'm actually going to pin the overpass together so it doesn't come apart. Make sure I got a good stick there. Okay, and then I'm just going to pin it and flip it back because I want to do the rest of these pieces here. So the other thing you want to do is flip this back and iron on this disc here. So grab a smaller sheet. Just show you that. But make sure your iron isn't going off the backside. Iron on too. If you hit the iron straight to the felt, it'll melt it. And that makes a mess. There we go. Those ones look good. And then iron on this tab insert too. And we can finish pressing the rest of the road pieces. This is just regular kitchen parchment paper. and I find it works really well for this. And you can get big long strips like this one. I use this big one all the time. So now I'm just going to make sure that everything stuck on well. Perfect. That looks great. Oh, I got a little bit of a corner here that needs a little bit more heat. But you shouldn't be able to peel it back with your finger. And sometimes I find the edges and the corners are easiest to miss. Yeah, a little bit. Good. I think that's good. Sometimes it'll peel back a little bit until it gets dry. So you also want to make sure, oh, see that one didn't stick very well. So I'm going to try that again. If you want to just hit one spot, I find I can put my hand underneath the iron. You can feel how hot it's getting. You can always use a towel or something underneath if you don't want to. But if that, because I didn't want to burn these pieces here, but I wanted to hit that again. It's good to kind of push it up. That might have been, seems to be sticking better now. I'll let that cool for a minute, and we'll move on to the next page. So now we need to start sewing again. Oh, and I got some lint in there. I forgot to hit that with the lint brush earlier. That's a good idea to do, because if you get little lint pieces in there, it really shows up under the paper. But there's not much you can do once it's done. So, okay. Now, time to start sewing. So I'm going to sew the overpass piece on first, just because I don't want that to flop off of the page. And let's get, so I've used all of those pieces up. That we will use right now. Then I'll leave those. Just trying to make some more space here. Okay. So now I'm just going to sew in a square all the way around here. And make sure you're getting the thicker felt underneath as well. As the thinner felt with the heat and bond on top. I'm just going to move that all over there. And next stitch. So the next thing we're going to do is do the stitching lines around the center lines. There we go. So I have this circle. It is, let me see, 2.5 inches. And it's just felt, and I use it to, as my guide for doing the circle, because it's really hard to stitch a circle. I always seem to make a mess of it if I don't use the guide, so I highly recommend using it. If you don't use the guide, you can also just do a chalk line, like trace a chalk line in there. That would work too. And we're also going to switch to our basting stitch. So the longest stitch, same thing as what we did here. And I start at the roundabout and then go all the way around the mat in the center of all the different rows. So this is a lot of sewing. I might edit some of it out of the video just because you don't need to watch me sew. So now that I'm finished that, I trim off all of these threads just from the top. I don't bother with the bottom ones. There we go, just so that those are out of the way. So there we go, we have beautiful road pieces. And now we're going to start adding on all of the rest of our pieces, starting with the trees, so we don't forget those. So this piece is actually a little bit long. Again, I've singed the ends with glitter. And then you just want to stitch it on in place. These are just for fun, fidgety, so start at the black line. This will stretch a bit, so I'll trim the end once I know exactly where it is. Oh, and switch back from your basting stitch. Just go back to a regular stitch. Cinch with my elastic. Cinch with my lighter, not elastic. There we go. So now we're going to move on to adding the garage on. So the garage just gets positioned here. Line it up with this edge so that's straight and the top edge is straight. If you end up overlapping the road a little bit, that is fine. Okay. So to do this one, let's pin it in place. There. And I start, and I kind of back my sewing machine in and use the right edge hinge as a guide, and then back and forth and just sew around the perimeter of the green. The next thing we're going to do is the car wash. So the car wash, catch up on the pattern. I'm trying to do this so that I follow exactly what the pattern is so that you don't get confused if you're following the pattern too. So line up the car wash piece now. Start with the blue one, and you want to line it up tight with this road here. Ideally you want a little bit of a space here. When the mat's folded up, there's a break. That's a fold line there. So if you leave a little bit of space right there, like that, the mat will fold easier. Okay, so tuck it up against there, and then line it up straight with the road and stitch. I do 2 stitching lines just for added safety and security. Once that's done, we can do the yellow. If any of the threads get in the way, you can trim them off, but I usually just try and leave them until the end. Here's my yellow car wash piece. So the tricky part about this one too is you want to make sure that it doesn't go too far over. So only about a quarter of an inch from the edge of the road here can it overlap. And then you also want to make sure that it lines up perfectly with the blue one, because this will eventually get snapped together. So again, just 2 stitching lines. There we go. That's done. Now the next one, we'll do the traffic light. So let's pin the car wash just out of the way for right now, because we're going to be working right here. And so you need your car wash piece and also the black pony bead and the 1/8 inch elastic. So I just noticed here my squares overhanging the sides. You can trim that right now because it'll be easier to do now than down the road. There. So now I've got the sides trimmed. You're going to position it so the yellow dots are facing up again, and then take your pony bead on the elastic and thread it through the hole. So the pretty side of the grommet should be facing up, and that's what the bead is going to rest onto. So it'll just, I don't know if you can see, looks like that. So now we're going to find the middle of your roads, which should be fairly easy because you have lines that go to it. I can just mark it there. So fold the traffic light in half. I find it's easier if it's kind of forming a V shape like that, because you need to position it in place, and I'm going to stitch back and forth the elastic to the mat right in the middle. And this is a little finicky to do. You need both hands to do it. So I get it in place, stretch the elastic with my fingers, and then make sure I'm all lined up before I put my presser foot down. Stretch the elastic a little bit, well, stretch it quite taut actually, before you sew, and then I'm going to get rid of my other thread here so it doesn't cause me problems. And then just back and forth several times. I do a lot of them because if a child pulls at the traffic light, you don't want it pulling off. So there, and I will snip this so I can show you the next pieces. Take that pin out. So now I just want to trim the edges of the elastic and singe again with the lighter. There we go. Now also you've got the white thread. I don't bother changing to black thread for that, but I don't like it being white because it's just obvious. So I just take a permanent marker and I color it black. That is my hack. I usually use a Sharpie, but my Sharpie's across the room. And there you go. So it just hides those stitching lines and you don't have to go to the trouble of switching out thread. All right, so there is the traffic light done. Oh, I also forgot to do the tab here for the overpass. So we just need to stitch basically like a U shape. So I'm going to go here, here, and then up the side. And I also want to leave almost like a little arch enough so I can stick my finger in underneath. It just makes it easier to put the tab for the car, for the overpass in. So to make that little kind of gap, I just stick my finger underneath here for this last side, and that gives you that little extra space. Okay, there we go. Okay, last one is the gas station. So again, we'll position it to make sure that this fuel sign doesn't hang higher off the edge there. Oh, sorry, we need to find the middle first. So fold it in half and pin the center points on both sides. I need to go through my pins and find ones that aren't bent and throw out the bent ones to make sure that's straight. I also, at this point, tuck the elastic over on the side so that you don't end up sewing it, because you don't want to sew it now. All right, so now that I've got this in place, again, the most important part is making sure you don't go too far over onto the ivory, or ideally not at all, just over the road piece. And no luck with pins today. I'm gonna pin this in place here. There, so now I'm going to stitch a square just like that. And you want to make sure that you have enough of a base support. Here, what did I say? In there, 3/8 of an inch. So just over, if you want to mark it, you can, but that is just over the presser foot width. I am going to cheat and not mark it now. And again, make sure you don't sew these elastics. now you have all of the pieces sewn on. The mat comes together pretty quickly once all that's done. You can take that out. There we go. So the next thing we're going to do, let me just check my pattern. Yes. Oh, while we're here, I'm going to sew the green dot to the rainbow elastic ribbon. So again, cinch the ends so they don't fray, and then position it kind of so the bottom of the elastic is probably about the 1/3 mark, and you're going to stitch at about the 1/4 mark. You want to leave enough space down here for the snap. So, and keep in mind you will see the stitch line from the good side of the fabric. Okay. And trim threads. So the next thing we're going to do is do snaps. So again, I'm going, oh, let's do some cleaning up of some threads. I'm going to use the punch-in snaps. You can get a kit with punch-in snaps at most craft stores, on Amazon, wherever you like to shop. They're usually fairly readily available. If you don't want to purchase one though, the cheap ones are about 20 bucks. If you don't want to purchase one, you can do the sew-on snaps again. So now would be the time. I'm not going to do that because it's tedious. I'm going to use the punch-in snaps. And where is my awl? Okay, my awl. The pointy needle-like thing you need to punch these snaps. So let's start with this one here. So you're also going to need this other piece that we ironed earlier. So position it in place. Make sure your elastic is straight and the stitch line is straight and everything is aligned where you want it. Poke the hole through, kind of about 2/3 down. So halfway between the stitch line and the edge line. You want it. You want to leave enough space. Don't poke your fingers. You want to leave enough space to fit the snap on the underside. So I make the hole a little bit bigger with these. So the snap fits in that hole. And then the other side, I put the male side, which is the one that, yeah, anyway, it's that one I hope you can see. And I need my punch tool. And give it a squeeze. There you go. So you want to make sure that this snap isn't sitting over top of this rainbow elastic, or else it usually doesn't get a good hold and the snap will come loose. So now put the thumbtack side, so thumbtack shaped side, and then the female or donut side on the bottom there. I do it this way so that when you are pushing it together, it's easier to push it in that way. So there, we're done with that for right now. I'm just going to put it aside. But now we're going to start doing some snaps on the mat as well. Let's start by doing the car wash. So roll it up into place like this, lining up your edges. And this is why it was important to line everything up earlier. If you're not happy with something, now is the time to change it. So now I'm going to stick the awl through this window. So I can use my center stitch line here as a guide. And you want to poke the hole kind of in between the bottom of the car wash sign. And here, I'll show you. So there, but it's at the end. The hole is right there, kind of at the end of the stitch line there. And I don't know, my ruler, that is, I don't know, 5/8 from the edge. Every mat is going to be a little bit different. But so the tack side of the blue snap goes on the inside like this. And then again, I use the male side. Like that. And also, so the tack side on the back side. Hook through the hole. There we go. So when it's put together, that's what it looks like. If it's low enough, you can see the wash sign. If it gets too high, you kind of lose the car wash. There. So now the traffic light. Make sure the top edge is flush like this. hold it in place and kind of pinch down below. You want to do your hole, say, 1/2 inch from the bottom there, so like 1/2 inch in there, right in the center, and kind of closer to the top than the bottom. But be sure to leave enough space for the snap. Okay. So there we go. This one, it doesn't matter which side you put on because the traffic light rotates. But the tack side should be on the outside. Like that. There we go. So now, I lucked in. So my center hole was, my grommet hole was perfectly in the center, so my traffic light stands up beautifully. Oh, it's leaning a little bit. You can give it a little bit of a twist. If you need to adjust, that's why that piece was in the bottom. So I'm looking at it here from the side. I don't know if you can see in the video, but you can see there's that little square in there. If you need to trim one of the sides to right the traffic light, you can. You have that little bit of flexibility. I'm going to trim, I think, the one of them just a little tiny bit. Don't take off too much at a time, because this part requires finesse. But you want to do it now instead of at the end in case something goes wrong. You can easily resew it now, but there we go. I think that's a pretty good traffic light. And you want to leave it as wide as possible at the bottom because it gives just more of a base support. There. There. Good. I'm happy with that. Our overpass piece is all done like that. And now we need to put our fuel sign together. So again, line everything up. Make sure your little garage tool is out of the way. I kind of lean it a little bit back. It just stands up a little bit nicer. So now you need to poke the hole between the halfway between the grommet and the top of the red piece there, but make sure not to hit the grommet eyelet. And poke it through. Leave also a little bit of excess at the top because I'm going to cut the top off with the pinking shears again. So then again, right in the middle, poke it all the way through. Now you're going through quite a bit of fabric here because you're also catching this yellow fuel sign. I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, there. So ideally what you want is to actually put the snap so it holds, just gives a little bit of extra support to those elastics so they stay in place, because if they get yanked, you don't want them pulling out. I find it's better to make it sturdy now than try and go back and fix it later. There we go. So there's the female side, and then this one I use the star snap for, just as an added little decoration, but you could just use a regular snap. And if you're using the sew-on snaps, remember you have to do that stitch line along the top of the glitter leather. There we go. Make sure that works. And now I'm going to grab my pinking shears again and just trim off that top little bit. Let's see if I can show you. So that's what the little gas station looks like there. So good news, the mat, the play surface is all assembled. So now let's just make sure I don't have anything else. We did all of the snap pieces, trimming. Okay, and now we're going to move on to the handle piece, but I'm going to stop the video at this point and set up for the next section.